The story truly begins on a quiet evening that felt no different from any other. People in different parts of the world were going about their usual routines. Some were returning from work, some were settling down with their families, and others were simply scrolling on their phones. No one had any idea that something strange was happening high above them, far beyond the clouds. It started with a single light, a soft glow in the sky that many ignored at first, assuming it was a plane or maybe a satellite reflecting sunlight. But then more lights started to appear slowly, quietly, like they were testing the boundaries of the night. A group of friends sitting on a rooftop noticed these lights first in one city. They joked about it, thinking it might be a drone show or some new advertisement stunt. One of them pulled out a phone and began recording because the lights were too unusual to ignore. They moved in a pattern that felt too perfect, too measured. But even then, most people didn't think it was anything serious. Strange things appear in the sky, sometimes bright meteors, weather balloons, military tests. Humans are used to brushing things off when life is already stressful. Across the world, in a small research center, two scientists stared at a monitor with confused expressions. They had been tracking weather data when a set of unknown signals started showing up on their system. At first, they assumed their equipment was malfunctioning. They restarted computers, rechecked antennas, even stepped outside to confirm if something strange was happening. But the signals repeated themselves in a pattern that didn't look random. No one wanted to jump to conclusions, but the look in their eyes said it all. Something was off. Meanwhile, in another part of the world, a commercial pilot flying a usual route saw the lights floating just above the cloud line. He had flown for decades and knew the sky better than most people know their own neighborhoods. Yet he had never seen something like this. The lights were moving faster than any aircraft he had ever seen, yet not fast enough to cause panic. They were graceful, almost calm, like they were just observing. He reported the sighting to the control tower, but the reply he received was strange. Multiple towers had already reported similar sightings. News didn't explode immediately. Only small posts appeared online, short videos from regular people who noticed the lights. Some videos were dismissed as edits or pranks. People are used to fake videos, so the online world didn't take anything seriously at first. But the number of posts increased within hours. And the thing that got everyone's attention was how similar the videos were, even though they were from totally different places. A popular science blogger, someone known for debunking online rumors, made a video explaining why these lights could easily be drones or reflections. But even he seemed uncertain as he spoke. Something about the shape and movement of the lights didn't match any known object. His viewers filled the comments with jokes, theories, and fears. Some believed it was a military experiment. Others thought it was the weather shifting. A few people whispered the word alien, but they said it playfully, not seriously. Governments, however, didn't play. They noticed the pattern instantly. Radar stations picked up unusual activity that did not behave like planes or missiles. Yet there was no sign of aggression. No fast movements, no sound, nothing threatening. If anything, the objects seemed like they were observing, collecting information. Watching. In one command center, a group of officers and analysts gathered around a large screen. They replayed the footage, zooming in and out, checking for any sign of a familiar aircraft. The room was silent except for the hum of the machines. Nobody wanted to make the first official statement. Too many things were uncertain, and no one wanted to start global panic. The world already had enough worries: economy, climate, wars, and everyday stress. Announcing unknown sky objects wouldn't help. Still, reports kept coming. A farmer in a rural area said he heard a low humming noise above his field. When he looked up, he saw a bright shape hovering silently, too still to be a drone. A fisherman on the coast said he saw lights reflecting on the ocean surface, like they were scanning something underwater. A teacher walking home late saw a glowing shape move across the sky and then stop, as if noticing her. She froze, her heart racing, until the object floated away slowly and disappeared behind the hills. The strange part was how calm everything remained. No explosions, no strange beams, no chaos. Just silent movement. Observation. For many people, the lights became a fascination rather than a threat. Children pointed at the sky with excitement. Teenagers posted about it constantly, calling it Sky Show 2.0. But underneath the curiosity, a quiet awareness spread. Something was coming. Or maybe something was already here. In one small office, deep inside a science institute, a researcher sat alone, staring at signal data that didn't make sense. She had spent her whole career studying communication waves and atmospheric activity. But the signals she saw that night repeated in a rhythm that reminded her of language not human language, but structured patterns that suggested intention. She stayed up all night analyzing the waves, her hands shaking as she wrote notes. She wasn't scared, but she was overwhelmed by the possibility that these lights were not accidents. They were messages. Maybe not to humans, but between themselves. As the night turned into morning, the world didn't wake up to chaos. It woke up to curiosity. News channels began discussing the strange sightings. Anchors kept their tone calm, careful not to spark fear. Experts were invited to comment, but most of them simply said they needed more time to understand. People talked at breakfast tables, during bus rides, and at their workplaces. Was it real? Was it a misunderstanding? Was the world about to change? Across all this noise, there was one moment that stood out more than anything. In a peaceful town, a family sitting in their backyard noticed a light moving lower than usual. It wasn't fast, but it wasn't slow either. It felt deliberate. The father picked up his child and stepped back just in case. The object hovered above a tree for a few seconds before rising again. No sound. No heat. Nothing except a feeling as if something intelligent was studying the everyday life of humans. This moment captured what the whole world was beginning to feel. The lights weren't acting aggressively. They weren't running from humans. They weren't trying to hide anymore. Instead, they were choosing to show themselves. Not fully, but enough to suggest that they were watching Earth more closely than anyone knew. As days passed, the frequency of sightings increased. From deserts to mountains, from busy cities to quiet villages, people saw the same calm glows moving with quiet intention. The world slowly shifted from confusion to real attention. Scientists held emergency meetings. Government officials exchanged encrypted messages. Even regular people started to sense that this wasn't temporary. Something bigger was approaching, something far beyond normal human experience. Yet despite all the strangeness, the world carried on with surprising stability. Humans are good at adapting. They can witness something extraordinary and still wake up the next day to go to work, make breakfast, take care of chores, or check their social media. Life continued, but underneath the surface, everything felt different. The quietness of the skies slowly became the center of global conversation. Something was coming, or maybe it had already arrived. But no one, not even the experts, could predict what would happen next. All they knew was that humanity had stepped into a moment that would be remembered forever. After days of strange lights drifting above different parts of the world, people slowly started to accept that something unusual was happening. Life continued, but a new kind of tension filled the air. People checked the sky more often. News reporters spoke about the events carefully, trying not to scare anyone. Some believed it was a foreign experiment. Others thought it was natural, and a few had already convinced themselves that Earth was being watched. Still, nothing had prepared anyone for what happened next. It was late evening when a huge object began entering Earth's atmosphere. At first, people thought it was an asteroid. Cameras around the world caught the bright streak of light moving silently across the sky. But unlike an asteroid, it didn't burn up or break apart. It slowed down. It changed direction. It descended as if it had a plan. People stepped out of their homes, stood on rooftops, and gathered in open fields just to see what this mysterious thing was doing. The object didn't crash. It didn't fall out of control. Instead, it landed smoothly in a remote desert, far from the nearest town. Dust rose around it, but not enough to cause panic. It was steady, controlled, almost gentle. For a long moment, the object just sat there quietly, glowing faintly under the night sky. News spread like fire. Helicopters rushed to the area. Military vehicles formed a perimeter, not because they wanted to attack, but because no one understood what the object was capable of. Scientists, engineers, and communication experts were flown in within hours. The world watched live updates, though many details were kept secret to avoid panic. When the first team of experts arrived at the site, the air around the object felt unusual. Not dangerous, but heavy, almost like a pressure that came from nowhere. The object was smoother than any aircraft humans had ever built. It had no visible doors, no windows, no edges. It looked like one single piece of material shaped perfectly, almost too perfect to be made by human hands. The team approached carefully, their steps slow and cautious. Every sound echoed in the quiet desert: footsteps, radios, breathing. The first thing they noticed was that the object reacted to their presence. As they came closer, strange symbols appeared on its surface. They looked like they were written in light rather than ink. The experts didn't understand any of it, but they recorded everything. No one wanted to miss a single detail. For hours, nothing else happened. The experts waited outside, unsure whether the object would open or show any sign of life. Some thought it might just be a probe, an unmanned machine sent to inspect Earth. Others believed something was inside, watching, studying, deciding what to do next. Then, just as the sun began to rise, the object finally responded. A soft humming sound spread through the air, gentle but deep enough to shake the sand. The glowing symbols on its surface moved and rearranged themselves. A scene formed on one side, something that hadn't been visible before. It slowly opened like a silent door. Everyone took a step back. Cameras zoomed in. Radios crackled with nervous whispers. For a moment, no one breathed. From the glowing entrance, figures stepped out. They weren't monstrous. They didn't rush out with weapons or aggression. They moved with calm confidence, almost like travelers stepping out of a train. Their movements were precise, steady, and very sure of themselves. That confidence alone made the humans feel uneasy. It wasn't threatening, but it was intimidating in its own way. Their skin had a metallic sheen, almost like it reflected the world around them. Their bodies were tall, thin, graceful, as if they had evolved in a place with different gravity. They held devices in their hands that humans couldn't understand. Their eyes, or what appeared to be their eyes, moved slowly from person to person, scanning, analyzing. Nothing about their behavior showed fear or confusion. If anything, they seemed unimpressed. One of the experts stepped forward and tried to communicate. He spoke calmly, introducing himself and explaining that humans wanted peaceful contact. The alien didn't respond in words. Instead, it raised its device, scanned the expert from head to toe, and then slowly turned away, as if evaluating him was enough and speaking wasn't necessary. This behavior repeated with every human present. The aliens walked around, examining equipment, touching the sand, observing the sky, and interacting with nothing and no one. They showed no sign of being threatened. They didn't act aggressive, but they acted superior, like they believed humans were simple, predictable. and not worth serious attention. A communication specialist stepped forward with a translator device, trying to send basic signals of greeting. The alien closest to her glanced at the device, tapped it lightly with its tool, and walked away without hesitation. The device immediately stopped working. It wasn't destroyed. It simply shut down, dead in an instant. The specialist stared at it in disbelief. The alien didn't even look back. This one moment told the humans a lot. The aliens didn't think negotiation was necessary. They weren't trying to build trust. They were studying Earth like someone studies insects, not out of cruelty, but because they believed they understood everything already. Their body language carried a silent message. We know more than you. You cannot surprise us. Back in the command center, officers watching the live feed exchanged uncomfortable looks. They noticed the arrogance in the aliens' movements. How they didn't bother acknowledging human attempts at communication. How they ignored most things around them, except what they found curious. One technician whispered, "They think we're weak." No one argued with him. Hours passed with the aliens wandering around their landing site. They scanned rocks, sky patterns, human vehicles, and even the sand beneath their feet. Everything was recorded in real time by their devices. But they refused to respond to any human voice, gesture, or signal. Their silence carried a strange weight. It felt less like a cultural difference and more like a deliberate choice. As if speaking to humans wasn't worth their effort. A few experts grew worried, not because the aliens were violent, but because they were confident. Too confident. Any species that travels across space would have advanced technology, but it was the attitude that troubled everyone. They behaved as though they already understood human nature without ever asking. They acted like the planet belonged to them the moment they stepped out of their craft. Meanwhile, people around the world watched the news with mixed emotions. Some were excited, believing humanity had finally made contact with intelligent life. Others were fearful, unsure what the aliens wanted. But the biggest feeling was confusion. Why were the aliens so silent? Why did they behave like humans were just background noise? Even kids noticed the difference. A little boy watching the news with his family pointed at the screen and said, "Why don't they talk?" His parents had no answer. As the day went on, the aliens finally gathered near their craft, their tools glowing softly. They seemed to communicate with each other using gestures and lights rather than sound. Humans tried to record everything, hoping to decode their language, but the patterns were too complex. It was like watching a conversation happening in fast forward. Then something unexpected happened. One alien pointed at the sky, and the others turned toward the same direction. A moment later, they all looked down at the humans again. Their stance shifted slightly. Not threatening, just assessing. It felt like they had made a decision. Minutes later, they went back inside their craft. The door closed seamlessly behind them. The humming sound started again. The object lifted into the air slowly, drawing in sand and light around it. Then, without warning, it shot upward so fast that the cameras struggled to follow. Within seconds, it vanished into the sky. For the next several minutes, everyone stood in silence. No one knew whether they had left for good or whether they would return. But everyone felt the same thing deep inside. The aliens had not come to say hello. They had come to judge, to measure, to decide how much humanity mattered. And the worst part was the feeling they left behind. They didn't think humans mattered much at all. After the aliens left the desert, the world didn't return to normal. People tried to act like things were the same going to work, cooking dinner, scrolling through videos, but something silent and heavy hung in the air. It was the feeling of being watched. The aliens hadn't attacked, hadn't spoken, hadn't harmed anyone, but the way they behaved left a message deeper than any words could have. They believed humans were weak. They believed Earth was simple. They believed humanity was easy to understand. They were wrong. But they didn't know that in different parts of the world, behind closed doors, something unexpected began to happen. Humans from different countries, people who often disagreed about everything, started working together. Scientists who had never met each other spoke through video calls every night. Engineers shared data freely. Even governments that were usually rivals exchanged information quietly. No one announced it publicly, but everyone understood one truth. If a species from another world had arrived, then humans needed to be united, not divided. Inside a small laboratory, two researchers stared at recordings of the alien craft. They watched how the craft lifted off without heat or fire. They studied the symbols on its surface. They replayed the moment the alien tapped the human device and shut it down instantly. One researcher said quietly, "They think we don't understand anything." The other replied, "Then let's show them we can learn." And that became the silent mission of humanity. People worked in different corners of the world, each contributing a tiny piece to a much bigger puzzle. Communication experts tried to decode the aliens' gestures and light patterns. Physicists studied the way the craft moved, how it stayed still without any visible support. Engineers tried to figure out the material the craft was made of just by analyzing video and radar data. It wasn't perfect, but humans had something strong on their side: adaptability. Humans learned fast when they need to dot in a research base built in the middle of a desert. Far from public eyes, a team of specialists gathered around a table. They had been called from different countries, different fields, different backgrounds. Some studied signals. Some studied energy. Some studied behavior. They didn't know each other, but they all understood why they were there. They had to understand the visitors before the visitors returned, and everyone expected the aliens to return. During the meeting, a communication analyst pointed at a screen showing strange, repeating waves that the world had detected weeks before the landing. "These patterns started months earlier," he explained. "We just didn't notice." A woman beside him added, "They were checking Earth long before they showed themselves." This realization hit everyone. Not only had the aliens observed humanity, but they had been doing it quietly for a long time. That made humans uncomfortable, even angry. No one liked being studied without permission. Meanwhile, in another part of the world, a group of college students gathered in a library late at night. They weren't researchers or experts. They were just curious people who wanted to understand what was happening. They watched news clips, listened to radio chatter, and read articles posted online. They discussed theories, but unlike many others, they didn't feel fear. They felt excitement. One student said, "They think we're weak because we look emotional." Another responded, "But emotion doesn't mean weakness. It means we think and adapt fast." Someone else added, "And we work together when it matters." It was strange how even ordinary people suddenly felt connected to a much bigger moment in history. Humanity wasn't just many separate groups anymore. It felt like one collective mind trying to understand a mystery at the same time. Global leaders were holding private meetings. They didn't argue about money or borders this time. They talked about what to do if the aliens returned with greater confidence. Some suggested preparing defenses, not to attack, but to protect. Others suggested trying harder to communicate. Everyone agreed on one thing: they could not afford to underestimate the aliens. But they also could not allow the aliens to underestimate humans. Quietly, countries began upgrading communication systems, building new satellites, improving scanners, and training specialists. Not because they wanted war, no one wanted that, but because humans had to show they weren't helpless. Humanity's greatest strength was never technology. It was coordination. In a mountain observatory, a lone astronomer spent long nights tracking unknown objects moving outside Earth's atmosphere. She noticed patterns. "They're still up there," she said during a video meeting with her team. "They didn't leave. They're watching from a distance." Her voice carried a mix of fear and determination. Across the world, in a technology center, a group of engineers attempted something bold. They were trying to recreate the humming sound the alien craft made during takeoff. They believed it wasn't just sound, it was some form of energy field. After many failures, they managed to produce a tiny vibration that made a metal plate float slightly above the table. Just for a second, everyone in the room froze. The plate fell back down quickly. But for that moment, they had achieved something humans had never done before. It wasn't alien-level technology, not even close. But it proved one thing: humans could learn faster than anyone expected. Meanwhile, governments monitored the skies more carefully than ever. Satellites scanned for unusual movements. Radar stations worked all night. If even a single unknown signal appeared, humans wanted to be ready. In homes, people talked in softer voices about the events. Parents answered their children's questions gently. "Are they dangerous? Why didn't they talk? Will they come back?" The parents didn't have answers, but they tried their best to stay calm. They didn't want fear to spread. They wanted their children to trust that humanity would handle whatever came next, and they were right. Humans were not sitting still. They were preparing. In the desert, where the aliens had first landed, a team of scientists was assigned to study the ground. They discovered something unusual in the sand, a faint energy trace. It wasn't harmful, but it wasn't natural either. It was like a fingerprint left by the alien craft. They collected samples, studied the particles, and created models of how the craft might have interacted with the environment. Each discovery brought humans one step closer to understanding the visitors. And with every step, something important became clear. The aliens underestimated how quickly humans could adapt, cooperate, and innovate deep underground. In a secured base, a special team worked with advanced computers. Their task was to analyze every pattern the aliens had displayed: their movements, their gestures, even the direction they looked. Behavioral scientists joined them, explaining how posture, timing, and eye movement could reveal personality traits. They concluded something significant. The aliens were confident, but not aggressive. They believed they were superior, but not cruel. They were observers, not attackers, at least not yet. This gave humanity a chance to prepare, not with weapons, but with knowledge. People who had once argued over politics and culture were now sharing the same worry and the same hope. They wanted to prove the aliens wrong. They wanted to show that humans were not weak, not simple, not predictable. Humanity had survived countless challenges throughout history, not because of strength, but because of intelligence and unity. For the first time in a long time, the world felt connected. In a small cafe, a man listening to the news quietly said, "They think we can't surprise them." A woman sitting nearby replied, "Then we will." This simple exchange reflected the feelings of millions. Humans were preparing quietly, not for war, not for conflict, but to show the aliens that Earth was not a planet to dismiss. Everywhere from laboratories to kitchens, from classrooms to government offices, the same thought grew stronger. Humanity had been underestimated, but humans were resilient. Humans were dreamers. Humans were problem solvers. Humans were survivors. And humans, when pushed into a corner, could unite in a way no other species could imagine. While the aliens observed from above, confident in their superiority, they didn't realize something important was happening below them. Humanity was waking up, and when humans wake up, they don't step back, they step forward. Days had passed since the aliens left Earth after their silent and strange visit. People around the world were becoming used to living under the feeling that someone might be watching from above. But even though the surface of life looked calm, something deeper was happening behind the scenes. Humanity wasn't sitting quietly anymore. They were learning, preparing, uniting in ways the aliens never expected. Still, no one knew when the visitors would come back or what they wanted. And then, without warning, the turning point arrived. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. People were in their workplaces, in the markets, in their homes, living their usual routines. There was no sign that anything unusual was about to happen. But far above Earth, high in the atmosphere, sensors began to detect irregular patterns. At first, technicians thought it was just interference. But the readings kept repeating, stronger each time. A young operator in a communication center stared at his screen with wide eyes. Lines of data scrolled too fast for him to read. It looked like someone was trying to enter Earth's global communication system. Not a hacker. Not a signal from another country. Something else. Something that didn't match any form of technology humans had created. He called his supervisor. More people rushed to the control room. Within minutes, several countries reported the same thing. An unknown signal was pushing into communication. Networks around the world. The strange thing was that the signal wasn't breaking anything. It was scanning, testing, touching every network lightly, as if trying to understand how humans communicated with each other. But even that simple act caused problems. Screens flickered. Channels went silent for a few seconds. Wireless signals dropped suddenly and came back. Most people didn't think it was a big deal. They blamed poor connection or technical issues. But the experts knew exactly what was happening. The aliens were testing Earth's systems. They wanted to see how humans reacted when something interfered with their communication. What the aliens didn't expect was how quickly humans responded. In dozens of countries. Engineers activated emergency protocols. Backup systems kicked in. Satellites rerouted data. Technical teams worked so fast, it felt like they had been preparing for this exact moment because they had. Humans had learned that the aliens were watching, so they trained themselves to react quickly, calmly, and smartly. Within minutes, the interference was isolated. After a few more minutes, the system recognized the signal structure. And soon after that, humans created a counter-strategy to block the intrusion. What surprised the world even more was that the interruption barely affected daily life. Most people didn't even notice a thing. Phones worked. Computers stayed online. Television came back quickly. The only people who truly felt the impact were the experts who were defending Earth from something they didn't fully understand. Up in orbit, the aliens were watching too. They expected chaos. They expected panic. They expected humans to freeze under pressure. Instead, they saw calm, coordination, and quiet confidence. Humans didn't scream or run or break down. They fixed the problem. And they fixed it fast. This moment became a turning point. Even though most of humanity had no idea what had really happened, inside a secure meeting room, top specialists gathered to analyze what had just taken place. One of them looked at a screen showing graphs of the alien intrusion. "They're testing our strength," he said. Another expert added, "or testing if we're really as weak as they think." A communication analyst leaned back and whispered, "Well, they got their answer." Meanwhile, in a busy city, a teacher noticed her classroom lights flicker for a moment. A student laughed and said, "Maybe aliens are playing with our electricity." Everyone chuckled, not knowing how close the joke was to the truth. Life continued as if nothing happened, which itself was incredible. The aliens had underestimated human resilience again. They believed disrupting communication would create fear, confusion, collapse. Instead, humans fixed the problem and kept moving, far away. In a high-security research station, a group of scientists were studying a copy of the alien signal. They had managed to trap a small portion of it before it faded. Now they were trying to decode its structure. One scientist ran tests repeatedly, her fingers shaking with excitement when she saw the results. "It's not just a signal," she whispered. "It's a message between their ships." This discovery was huge. It meant the aliens were not only watching Earth, they were talking to each other in ways humanity could almost understand. Humans weren't close to fully decoding their language, but they were starting to find patterns. And patterns were the first step toward understanding intelligent communication. All this frightened the aliens more than humans realized. For the first time, the visitors understood that humans were not as simple as they thought. They adapted quickly. They solved problems fast. They worked together without being told. Their emotion didn't make them weak. It made them determined. Later that night, while most of the world slept peacefully, a small group of specialists studied satellite images. They noticed something strange. 3 alien crafts were moving closer to Earth again. Not landing this time, but hovering in higher orbit, almost circling. They seemed cautious. The aliens were watching with more seriousness now. They were curious, maybe even confused, because things were not going the way they expected. They wanted to see how far humans could go. They wanted to test Earth again, but they didn't act immediately. They hesitated. Their hesitation showed something important dashed out in a small village. An elderly man sat outside his home, looking at the sky. He didn't know about the signals or the global efforts, but he could feel something in the air. The stars looked brighter, sharper. He whispered to himself, "Whatever they are, they don't know who we are yet." Around the world, humanity kept learning. They created new strategies to protect their systems. They studied alien patterns. They trained more experts. People shared ideas across languages and borders. The aliens had tried to apply pressure, but humans responded with intelligence. Not panic. And slowly, humanity began to feel different, not scared, but aware. Aware that they were stepping into a time unlike any before. Aware that the aliens were not invincible. Aware that humans were stronger than they seemed. Late one evening, a group of engineers sat on a rooftop after a long day of work. They looked at the sky where a faint, distant glow seemed to move. One engineer sighed and said, "They're still up there, watching." Another smiled softly and replied, "Let them watch. They'll see who we really are." These quiet moments, scattered across the world, showed how humans felt deep inside. Not terrified, not helpless, but prepared. Stronger than before. United more than ever. The aliens had expected Earth to break under a simple test. Instead, Earth stood firm. And through all this, humanity didn't attack or act aggressive. They simply defended, learned, and adapted. It was then, in that calm and powerful silence, that things shifted. The aliens realized something that they had completely missed earlier. Humans were unpredictable, not because of weakness, but because of strength. Not because of fear, but because of intelligence. And that realization, more than anything else, shook the visiting species. They had come expecting to control the situation. Now, they were not so sure. When the message was finally prepared, there was silence in every control room across the world. People stood near screens, waiting for the signal to be sent. No one raised their voice, no one argued, and no one tried to take credit. It was a moment of unity that didn't need speeches or applause. Everyone simply knew this message had to be clear, calm, and firm. Humanity wasn't trying to start a fight, but they also weren't going to bend down or act scared anymore. They had seen enough, learned enough, and prepared enough. Now it was time to show the visitors that Earth wasn't weak or confused. Earth was ready to stand tall. The message itself wasn't aggressive. It didn't threaten them or challenge them. It simply explained that Earth was a home shared by billions of people who may argue sometimes, may disagree often, and may come from different cultures. But they knew how to unite when something important was at stake. The message said that cooperation was the only acceptable direction. Humanity didn't want conflict, but they wouldn't allow anyone alien or not to treat them like a low-level species. The message ended by inviting the visitors to communicate properly, with respect, and not with silent actions meant to intimidate. Once the message was sent, there was a strange stillness. People stared at the screens, waiting for any sign of response. Minutes passed, then an hour, then several hours. During this time, the world felt both nervous and strong. Families watched the news with quiet hope. Experts stayed near their equipment. Soldiers remained alert but calm. Humanity wasn't trembling. They had already faced the worst part, being underestimated. Now they were standing in a new space where confidence and caution lived together. The aliens finally responded, but their first reaction wasn't a direct message. Instead, their main ship shifted position in the sky. It moved slightly higher, almost like it wanted distance to think. This small movement showed something important. The confidence the aliens once had was cracking. They were no longer acting like rulers or observers who saw themselves far above humans. They were hesitating. That hesitation alone told humanity that things were changing. People didn't celebrate. No one clapped or jumped. Instead, there were long breaths of relief. This wasn't victory. This was balance. And sometimes, balance feels more powerful than winning. Over the next few hours, something unexpected began to happen. Across different countries, experts noticed bursts of unusual data coming from the alien ship. Patterns of signals, fragments of unknown language, and shapes of communication started appearing. At first, it looked like noise. But then a group of analysts figured out that the aliens were trying to adjust their communication system. They weren't ignoring the message, they were trying to respond in a clearer way. For the first time since their arrival, it seemed like the aliens were trying to understand humans instead of just analyzing them. Inside the command center, a scientist leaned closer to the screen, noticing the structure of the signals. It wasn't smooth or confident like before. It almost looked careful. The visitors who once projected arrogance were now showing signs of caution. It was like they finally understood that humans weren't a species to push around or underestimate. Humans could think, adapt, and learn faster than they had expected. The world watched patiently. The alien ship dimmed some of its bright lights. It was the first visual change they ever made. This gesture wasn't random. Many believed it was a sign of lowering defense or lowering pride. The ship didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt unsure. Inside labs and centers, teams worked together without anyone fighting for power. One person translated patterns. Another predicted symbol meanings. A third tested message compatibility. It was unity in motion, something humanity had always struggled with, but somehow mastered when pressure was highest. Watching them work was enough to make anyone feel proud. Finally, after almost half a day of silence and scattered signals, a clear transmission arrived. It wasn't in human language, but the tone was different. It didn't feel sharp or commanding. It felt like an attempt at peace, an attempt to meet humanity halfway. The sound was slow, steady, and almost gentle. The message asked for a neutral place to communicate further. It didn't demand. It asked. For the first time since they landed, the aliens were showing respect. People felt something shift inside them. Not fear, not anger. Something like quiet dignity. Humanity had stood firm, and the visitors had noticed. There was a moment when everyone realized what had happened. The aliens finally understood that humans weren't weak. They were strong in ways that couldn't be measured by technology or appearance. They were strong because of their ability to work together, to think creatively, to adapt quickly, and to stay calm under pressure. Humanity had surprised even itself. Meetings were arranged, not in a military base and not in a government building. A neutral environment was created, a simple, open area with nothing that could be mistaken for a trap. Transparent barriers were placed, not as weapons, but as reassurance for both sides. Humanity wanted peace, but they wanted clarity, too. When the aliens sent their representatives down, their movements were slower than before. They didn't walk with the same confident posture. Their eyes, whatever shape or form they had, didn't scan the area like they owned it. They looked around with curiosity and caution. It was like they were finally seeing humans as equals. On the human side, a small group stood waiting. They didn't raise their hands or bow. They simply stood still, calm, and respectful. Their faces showed a mix of seriousness and hope. They were not afraid, and they were not trying to impress anyone. They were simply representing Earth as it truly was, steady, thoughtful, and prepared. When the two sides faced each other, the air felt heavier, but not in a scary way. It felt meaningful, a moment that would be remembered for generations. The humans didn't speak first. They allowed the visitors to show their intention. And the visitors did something no one expected. They lowered a small device, a communication tool, and placed it gently on the ground. It projected a simple message in symbols the humans had already begun to decode, that the message was an apology, not dramatic, not emotional. Just a simple, honest admission that they had misjudged humanity. They had assumed humans were divided, slow, or unable to stand together. They had expected fear. They had expected confusion. They got neither. Humans did not react with pride or ego. They reacted with calm understanding. They knew that this moment wasn't about proving superiority. It was about showing that respect can change everything. The conversation that followed wasn't perfect. Both sides made mistakes while communicating, but both sides tried. They exchanged simple ideas first: safety, boundaries, intentions. The more they talked, the more relaxed the atmosphere became. The aliens slowly adjusted their tone. Humans adjusted their approach. Bit by bit, trust started forming, not strong trust, but the kind that acts as a bridge. People watching from a distance felt relieved. They knew humanity had crossed an important stage. The visitors no longer saw Earth as a lesser place. They saw it as a world worth listening to. In the days that followed, cooperation replaced tension. The aliens stopped their silent observations and chose open communication instead. Humans learned more about alien technology, not as enemies studying weaknesses, but as partners trying to understand each other. The world felt different, more united, more confident. Humanity didn't win through force. They didn't win through threats. They won through unity, intelligence, and calm strength. They showed that respect is powerful, that standing firmly but peacefully can change even the most unbalanced situation. And the aliens? They finally understood the cost of underestimating humans. Not a cost paid in battle or destruction, a cost paid in pride. After the long, intense days that had passed, the world felt strangely quiet. This quiet wasn't scary or uncertain. It felt peaceful, like the world had taken a long breath and finally exhaled. For the first time since the aliens arrived, people stepped outside without constantly looking toward the sky. Children played normally again. Adults went back to their routines, though with one important change: they now carried a sense of pride that wasn't loud, but deeply felt. Humanity had faced something massive, something beyond imagination, and instead of breaking, it had stood strong. Inside the communication center, teams that had barely slept in days finally eased into their chairs. They weren't celebrating or cheering. They just looked at one another with tired smiles. the kind that come after surviving something incredible. Everyone knew this wasn't the end of the story, but it was the beginning of a new chapter 1, where humans and the visitors had a chance to build something meaningful rather than continue living in fear or misunderstanding. Alien's message of apology still echoed in everyone's minds. It wasn't dramatic or emotional, but it had changed everything. That simple admission that they had misjudged humans was more powerful than any scientific discovery. It showed that even a highly advanced species could learn and change when confronted with truth. For humans, it was a reminder that confidence doesn't always come from size, strength, or technology. Sometimes it comes from unity, patience, and calm determination. In the days that followed, the aliens continued communicating in small, careful steps. They sent short signals that could be translated easily. They didn't hover as low as before or act like observers studying something inferior. Instead, they positioned their ship at a respectful distance, almost like they were saying, "We're here, but we're not here to dominate." The tone of everything they did was softer. Now, human leaders, scientists, and safety teams met again, but this time the atmosphere was different. There was no panic, no emergency alerts, no fear of the unknown. People sat at the table with open notebooks, calm expressions, and a readiness to learn. Every meeting was filled with questions, not questions of fear, but questions of curiosity. People wanted to understand the aliens' history, their intentions, and their technology. But they also wanted to share Earth's own story. One expert pointed out something important. If they came here expecting fear and found unity instead, then the biggest lesson is not about them, it's about us. Everyone agreed. Humanity had discovered a part of itself that had been hidden for a long time. A strength that only appeared when pushed to the limit. Over time, humans began teaching the aliens simple things: how different cultures worked, how languages formed, how humans solved problems through creativity, instinct, and teamwork. The aliens listened with quiet focus. They had believed humans acted randomly, emotionally, without logic. But now they began to see the beauty in human unpredictability. Humans didn't follow strict patterns. They adapted. They improvised. They learned fast. That was something the aliens hadn't prepared for. In exchange, the aliens shared small pieces of knowledge, not weapons or dominating tools, but ideas. Concepts about energy efficiency, healing methods, environmental balance, and peaceful systems of communication. Their way of sharing knowledge wasn't through long speeches. Instead, they sent symbols and patterns, like guiding humans to discover answers on their own. The process was slow but meaningful. Meanwhile, ordinary people across the world watched the news with a mix of excitement and disbelief. Stories spread about how humanity had stayed calm during the hardest moments, how scientists worked together without ego, and how countries shared data without hesitation. These stories inspired millions. For once, people didn't talk about what divided them. They talked about what they had done together. One small story stood out from the rest. A group of college students who had helped decode a small part of the alien communication system. They weren't scientists or experts. They were just curious, hard-working young people who had stayed awake for nights trying to understand a strange pattern. Their breakthrough helped the main teams communicate faster. When the world heard this story, people smiled. It showed that even small hands can hold big solutions. Another story came from a retired engineer who lived alone. He had built simple models in his garage that helped researchers understand a structural problem in the alien signals. He didn't expect recognition, but when his work was acknowledged, he simply said, "You never know what small things can make a difference." His words became a quote used worldwide. Moments like these showed that humanity's strength wasn't in perfect coordination. It was in collective effort. It was in the willingness of ordinary people to step forward when needed. As cooperation grew, the aliens began lowering parts of their ship in small sections, allowing human experts to study harmless components. The technology didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt like a bridge. Scientists walked around the devices with awe, like children exploring something wondrous. They didn't try to steal anything or break into any system. They followed every rule agreed upon. This mutual respect strengthened the slowly forming trust. One day, during a scheduled communication session, the aliens asked a surprising question. Not in perfect words, but in a translated meaning. What drives humans to unite under pressure? The humans took a while to answer. It wasn't an easy question. Finally, one representative explained in simple words, "When something threatens all of us, we remember that we are one family. Different, yes. Imperfect, yes. But still connected." The aliens processed this answer longer than expected. It was clear they were trying to understand a concept that didn't exist in their own society. Over the next weeks, the relationship between humans and aliens became calmer and more open. They still kept respectful distance, but the tension from earlier days was gone. The aliens even adjusted some of their behaviors to avoid causing fear. They dimmed their ship lights at night, sent schedules ahead of time, and avoided interfering with human communication systems. These small gestures showed that they truly wanted peace. Now, humanity responded by offering a place for long-term communication, a peaceful observation zone far from major cities, open to both sides. It wasn't a base or a military station. It was more like a simple meeting ground, a symbol of cooperation rather than control. The aliens accepted this gesture, and slowly interactions became routine instead of dramatic. With time, people grew used to seeing the alien ship far above, like a quiet guardian rather than a threat. And surprisingly, life began to feel normal again. But it wasn't the same normal as before. It was better. People felt wiser, braver, and more connected. Humanity had changed, and no one wanted to go back to the old ways of fear and division. Schools taught students about the event not as a dangerous encounter, but as a moment of transformation. Children learned how unity can turn fear into strength. Adults understood how important calm thinking is during chaos. Leaders realized that respect is more powerful than force. For the aliens, the experience was also life-changing. They had arrived expecting to study an inferior species. They ended up finding a species that taught them humility. They learned that intelligence isn't just in advanced machines. Sometimes it's in emotion, intuition, creativity, and courage. They saw that humans could rise fast when underestimated. In the end, the story became a reminder for both sides. For humans, it was proof that they were stronger than they believed. For the aliens, it was a lesson that true understanding requires respect. And for the world as a whole, it was the beginning of something beautiful, a new chapter where two very different species learned to walk side by side, not in fear, but in hope.